think the most obvious thing about myself as a game collector is the fact that I love the Game Boy. This is the pocket, my OG game. You know what? This guy right here was something that I lusted over my entire childhood. Now, I couldn't have one of my own because this is Brazil in the 90s, so people are broke. And not only that, but it's a portable system. So my parents reasoned that if they were to give me one, they'd have to give my siblings one each too, making something that was already expensive completely not viable. So that's why, let me put this thing back up because otherwise my OCD is gonna kick in like crazy when I'm editing this thing. That's better. So I grew up wanting the thing, couldn't have it, and now I have all of them. I still play on them every single day. I love the library. I love the very concept of a portable console. The Game Boy is what kickstarted my obsession with portables. And as you can see, it really is an obsession. But even I, a huge Game Boy fanboy, have to admit that, well, to put it bluntly, the original Game Boy kinda sucked. Here's 5 reasons why, and don't hate me too much. I do love it, I just have to be honest. It sucked. Number 1, it was terrible to hold. Pop quiz. What did the Atari Lynx, the Game Gear, the Nomad, hell, Tiger handhelds, what do they all have in common? All of those put the controls on either side of the screen, making for a horizontal layout. That's a much more comfortable way to game to hold the system. Hell, look at any controller ever, they're all horizontal. Holding something of the size and weight of the original Game Boy was kind of like holding a brick standing on its end. It was not very comfortable. And maybe that's why when Nintendo put out the Game Boy Advance, that one had a horizontal controller layout. Of course, that didn't last because the GBA SP would undo that, but baby steps, I suppose. Number 2, the boring monochromatic screen. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's 1989, right? It's the 80s. Color screens were expensive, so we had to cut corners, we had to make do, and most of the games on the Game Boy kind of worked with the black and vomit green screen, I suppose. But again, even for the standards of the time, that was hard to justify. Both the Atari Lynx and the Game Gear had color screens. And yes, both of those did come out after the Game Boy, but not that much later. The Lynx came out in the same year and the Game Gear the year after that. So how come they were able to do it and Nintendo was not? We know why. Those are more expensive, yes. But you get what you pay for, and this is what you got with the Game Boy. It's not the best looking screen. Like, it was on par with the calculator, essentially. And I think we can all agree that games are not meant to be played in black and white. I'm sorry, Snake, on the cell phone. I did used to love you back in like high school, but come on. Plus, Snake came with the cell phone. Pokemon didn't come with the Game Boy, so point cell phone, I suppose. Hell, Sega themselves made fun of the Game Boy for lacking a color screen, as seen here on this Game Boy commercial featuring a very young Ethan Suplee, which, by the way, did you know he lost a lot of weight? Way to go, dude. He is a Scientologist though, so Number 3, no backlight. Again, hard to justify considering its competitors had both a backlit and colored screen. Now, like I mentioned before, I didn't own a Game Boy growing up, but I did have one for about 2 to 3 weeks. I traded a computer game for a Game Boy, I remember in the late 90s, and then my parents and I went on a road trip shortly after, so I had a Game Boy on a car trip for about 3 weeks or so, so I got to experience what it was like, and it was horrible to play this in any condition of low light. It was one of those situations, and I'm sure you're very familiar with this experience, where you're sitting in the back seat and you're waiting for the next street light so you can see what's going on the screen. I think this is something every Game Boy owner went through, that and begging your parents for money for fresh batteries. And yeah, that was not, I mean, it was hard enough to hold the thing. It was not the most comfortable thing to hold. The screen wasn't that great, and it wasn't backlit. So now, the interesting thing about the absence of a backlight is that spawned a whole cottage industry of accessory lights for the Game Boy, and they all kind of, well, sucked. Now, that monochrome screen that I mentioned before, this is one of those instances where a flaw actually provides a beneficial side effect, because take the Game Boy Advance, also didn't have backlight, but it had a color screen. The problem with the color screen is that it doesn't provide the necessary contrast for that to perform well in low light conditions. The original Game Boy, on the other hand, being monochromatic, it had a lot more contrast going on, so it helped a little bit. Number 4, a horrible refresh rate. Now, as you can tell, most of the problems with the Game Boy boil down to, well, the screen wasn't that great. And even when you get past the lack of backlight and the fact that it's basically just black and white, you still have the issue of the refresh rate. You had a lot of ghosting going on, and in some games like say Pokemon or basically any turn-based RPG, that's not a factor, but in faster games like say Donkey Kong or Super Mario Land, it became a blurry mess sometimes, and often you were responding not to what was actually happening on the screen, but to the ghosting that was left in its wake. Again, even for the standards of its time, it's hard to justify. Both the Sega Game Gear and the Atari Lynx had, on top of backlit color screens, much better refresh rates. So, like I said in the beginning, it's all the screen, man. Most of the problems I have with the Game Boy is actually a problem with the screen. Most, not all, because number 5 is, what were they thinking with this button layout exactly? Look, the position of the buttons on the Game Boy flat out don't make sense. I'm gonna prove it to you. You hold the Game Boy like this, right? Your thumb, your right thumb, starts at the bottom here and it points to the top left corner. But the buttons here, A and B, and actually for the OCD out there, it's B and A. Why not A and B? But the way you hold the system, this diagonal here goes counter to the diagonal created by your thumb. Now, for some games, say turn-based RPGs like Pokemon, this is not an issue because you're only going to be pressing one or the other. Confirm, cancel. But for games that require you to hold B and then press A, your hand has to go up here. This is even more uncomfortable when you have to show it to a camera. Your screen, you're holding it with this hand like this, right? So your thumb is like this, and this thumb comes from the top down. So you're holding it. Why? Why? Wouldn't it be so easy to have these, like, just invert the positions on this, have the A be down here, B be up here? What were they thinking? Is there any rationale to justify this at all? Did Gunpei Yokoi, the creator of the Game Boy, did he just like sketch this up and then send it off to be made into an actual product and never actually held one in his hands after that? It's, of all the decisions made on the original Game Boy and the Pocket as an extension of that, in this case here, this is the one that I find the hardest to justify. There's just no reason that I can think of why B should be lower than A when that creates a really weird angle when you're holding the thing. Now, of course, me ranting against the Game Boy with this much energy makes me sound like a hater, and nothing could be farther from the truth. I'm a big fan of the device because of its library. This is a lesson that Nintendo taught us back in the days of the Game Boy that some people are still struggling to understand. Hardware doesn't matter. The Game Boy competed with consoles that were much better than itself, and who remembers the Atari Lynx? Nobody. Because it didn't have Zelda, it didn't have Donkey Kong, it didn't have Pokemon, it didn't have Mario. Hardware means nothing without a library to back it up. And that's why so many people still remember the Game Boy so fondly. Hell, I still play this thing every day. Yes, the games were black and white, it was blurry as hell because of all the ghosting, the controls don't make a whole lot of sense, and this isn't the most comfortable thing to play on. But you could play Pokemon with your friends and trade Pokemon in the schoolyard. The great library on the Game Boy made it a great system despite all of its many flaws. That's what Nintendo does best, in my opinion. It takes, let's say, subpar hardware, but pairs it with a strong first-party library that you just can't ignore and you won't find anywhere else, which is the key here. But yeah, these are the 5 reasons why the Game Boy sucks. Again, big fan, but we have to admit, not the best hardware Nintendo ever put out. What do you think? Do you love the Game Boy? Do you hate it? Did you have one growing up? Did you have one of the competitors? How do you think that the Game Boy stacks up to, say, the Sega Game Gear? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you're new here, consider subscribing. I put about 2 videos a week, 2 new videos a week. Make sure to hit the notification bell, because as you all know, YouTube doesn't do the best job at letting viewers know that their favorite creators put out new stuff. So hit that notification bell. I may not respond to every single comment you guys put here, but rest assured, I read every single one of you, and I love hearing back from you guys. Anyway, that's all the time I have for today, and I'll see you guys next time.